The town looked ordinary. Rows of modest houses, church bells that marked Sundays, the local high school football games under pale stadium lights, the kind of place where people trusted each other enough to leave cars unlocked and wave at strangers on their morning walk. Life seemed predictable, the rhythm steady, like a song that never changes key. Parents sent their children to school believing it was safe, a sanctuary where trusted adults would guide them through lessons and adolescence. But behind the closed doors of that same community, a storm was brewing, one that no one could see at first. A substitute teacher, smiling and seemingly unremarkable, was at the center of it. Her name was Brittany Fortinberry. To many parents, she was just another face in the school system, someone who filled in when the regular teachers were absent. To students, she appeared approachable, friendly, maybe even fun. But investigators would later allege that her presence in those classrooms and hallways wasn't innocent at all. Before we dive into this disturbing case, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. On this channel, we uncover the darkest mysteries and the most shocking investigations, stories you won't hear anywhere else. If you enjoy gripping true crime storytelling, this is the place for you. Now let's get into today's case. Authorities allege that Brittany used her position and the trust that came with it to manipulate, coerce, and exploit. It started with whispers, a strange text message here, a story told among friends there. Most adults brushed it off at first, chalking it up to the drama of teenagers. But the whispers grew louder, until one day a parent heard something so chilling it forced the community to confront a truth no one wanted to believe, that a teacher, someone hired to educate and protect, could have turned predator. When the first allegations surfaced, shock rippled through the small town. For many, it seemed impossible. A teacher? That didn't happen here. But as detectives began pulling at the threads, the tapestry unraveled quickly. What began as a handful of troubling accusations soon expanded into a sprawling investigation. More alleged victims came forward, more stories were told, and with each disclosure, prosecutors added charge after charge until the list stretched into the dozens, eventually climbing to nearly 50 counts. The charges painted a devastating picture: alleged sexual misconduct with minors, child molestation, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, even the distribution of harmful material. Each count wasn't just a number. It represented a young life disrupted, a family shaken, and a community betrayed. And then came a revelation that made the story even more disturbing. Brittany's husband, Nicholas Fortinberry, was not, prosecutors allege, a bystander. Investigators claim that Nicholas knew more than he admitted. They alleged he had threatened at least one victim, warning him to stay away from Brittany until he was older. That accusation opened up an entirely new layer of the case, suggesting not just one adult accused of abusing their position, but two adults entangled in a web of secrecy, fear, and intimidation. For prosecutors, the evidence was presented as overwhelming: alleged messages, testimony, and the voices of teenagers who finally found the courage to speak. For the defense, the task was clear: to create doubt, to argue that memories were faulty, that the stories conflicted, that gossip had poisoned the truth. They suggested that social media had twisted perceptions, that teenagers were exaggerating, or that investigators had rushed to judgment. In court filings, defense attorneys painted Brittany as vulnerable herself, someone who was misunderstood, someone whose behavior might not match the crimes she was accused of. But prosecutors pushed back, laying out their case in stark terms. They described what they said was grooming, the slow, deliberate act of gaining a young person's trust, isolating them, and normalizing behavior until lines blur and boundaries break. They described the way gifts, attention, and, in some cases, drugs were allegedly used as tools of control. They highlighted details that, according to reports, made even seasoned investigators pause: masks, orchestrated encounters, and the use of fear to keep victims silent. As the community absorbed these revelations, outrage grew. Parents who had once seen Brittany as harmless were left questioning every interaction their children had with her. How long had this gone on? Who knew? Why didn't anyone stop it sooner? The schools scrambled to respond. The district placed Brittany on leave and launched an internal review. Meetings were held, statements were made, but the damage was already done. Trust had been shattered, and once broken, it's hard to rebuild. At the heart of the storm were the alleged victims. Teenagers who had thought they were keeping secrets suddenly found themselves at the center of a media circus. Some wanted justice, some wanted to forget. Others feared the judgment of their peers, the whispering in hallways, the way eyes would follow them. To come forward in a small town is to expose yourself not just to the court, but to neighbors, friends, and even family who might not believe you. Investigators worked carefully. They used trauma-informed interviewers who specialized in speaking with young victims, ensuring they were heard without leading them. They gathered devices, scoured text messages, and pieced together timelines. Digital evidence became a cornerstone of the case, offering prosecutors tangible proof that could back up testimony. But defense attorneys were quick to attack it, suggesting that texts could be taken out of context, that devices could be tampered with, that teenagers sometimes lie. Meanwhile, Nicholas Fortinberry's alleged role loomed larger. According to prosecutors, he didn't simply ignore what was happening. He actively tried to cover it up. The intimidation charges painted him as someone who allegedly threatened and pressured, trying to silence those who could expose the truth. If proven, those allegations wouldn't just link him to Brittany's actions. They would suggest a coordinated attempt to protect her by scaring victims into silence. In Indiana, the charges Brittany faced carry the potential for decades behind bars if proven. Level 1 child molestation is among the most serious offenses in the state, with penalties that can extend beyond a lifetime. Prosecutors made it clear they intended to pursue the harshest consequences available if the allegations are proven true. For Brittany, every court date became a spotlight. Cameras outside the courthouse, reporters asking questions, and a town that could no longer pretend not to know. In some hearings, she appeared composed, in others shaken. Her attorneys filed motions, challenged the state's narrative, and hinted at alternative explanations. But the weight of the allegations hung heavy, and the sheer number of counts made the case unlike anything the community had ever seen. The ripple effects extended far beyond the courtroom. Families grappled with guilt. How had they not seen the signs? Teachers wondered if they had missed red flags. And for other survivors of abuse, the case was a painful reminder of their own stories. Hotlines lit up with calls, as people across the state disclosed long-buried experiences triggered by the headlines. The story of Brittany and Nicholas Fortinberry was no longer just about two defendants. It had become a mirror for a larger conversation about how institutions protect children, how communities respond to betrayal, and how the justice system seeks accountability for the most vulnerable. And yet, despite the growing mountain of evidence presented, the case was far from simple. Trials are not about outrage or headlines. They are about what can be proven. Every allegation would need to be supported by testimony, corroboration, or hard evidence. Every charge would need to withstand cross-examination. And every alleged victim would need to sit with the weight of reliving their trauma in a courtroom filled with strangers. For the prosecution, the goal was justice. For the defense, the goal was doubt. And for the community, the goal was something harder to define: healing, closure, maybe even understanding. But in cases like this, the truth often feels elusive, and the scars can last long after verdicts are read. This was the beginning of a trial that would shake the foundations of trust in a small Indiana town. A case that reminded everyone watching that predators can allegedly hide in plain sight, and that the greatest danger sometimes comes not from strangers, but from those we are taught to trust. The courthouse became the stage. Each hearing brought more people into the gallery: parents, reporters, and townsfolk who couldn't believe what they were hearing, but also couldn't stay away. Rumors ran wild outside the courthouse steps. Some insisted Brittany had been misunderstood, that this was all exaggerated gossip spun into a legal nightmare. Others muttered darkly that they always suspected something was off, that maybe now the truth was finally coming out. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors laid out their case with precision. They spoke of grooming, that subtle, insidious process that experts say is used by predators to gain trust. They described how Brittany allegedly offered attention and validation to teens at an age when both felt intoxicating. Prosecutors suggested she blurred the lines between teacher and friend, slowly creating a secret world with certain students. In that private world, according to investigators, rules were bent and eventually broken. Evidence, they said, backed it up. Text messages, allegedly sent between Brittany and students, showed conversations that crossed professional boundaries. Words that started as playful or casual allegedly turned into something more sinister. Prosecutors emphasized the language, the tone, and the frequency of those messages. They argued this wasn't an accident. It was a calculated attempt to normalize inappropriate contact. The defense fought back, insisting that context mattered. They argued that teenagers exaggerate, that screenshots can be misleading, and that prosecutors were reading intent into ordinary exchanges. They said Brittany's role as a substitute meant she was sometimes more casual with students than permanent teachers. Her attorneys suggested that prosecutors were twisting her words into crimes. As testimony unfolded, it became clear this wasn't just one incident or one victim. According to prosecutors, the accusations stretched across multiple alleged victims, each with their own version of events. Their accounts varied in detail, but, investigators claimed, followed a chillingly similar pattern. One described being contacted outside of school hours. Another recalled being invited into a space where boundaries were blurred. Each story added weight to the prosecution's narrative. Then came the bombshell, the alleged involvement of Brittany's husband, Nicholas. Prosecutors accused him of knowing and, in at least one instance, allegedly threatening a young male victim to keep quiet. According to their claims, Nicholas allegedly told the teenager to stay away from Brittany until he was older, a statement that prosecutors argued revealed both knowledge and complicity. The defense pushed back immediately. Nicholas's attorneys argued that this was hearsay, that there was no proof he made such statements, and that his only role was as Brittany's spouse caught in the storm of accusations he didn't create. They argued that prosecutors were unfairly dragging him into the case to paint a darker picture, using guilt by association to make Brittany look worse. Still, the charges against Nicholas stuck. He now faced his own battle in court, with prosecutors alleging he wasn't just aware of what was happening, but actively tried to silence those who might expose it. If proven, that would make his case a separate but deeply connected chapter in this unraveling saga. Back in the community, the shockwaves deepened. Parents held hushed conversations at kitchen tables, wondering how much of this was real. Teenagers traded stories in whispered tones at lockers, debating who knew what and when. Some students claimed they had seen odd interactions between Brittany and certain classmates, but dismissed them at the time. Others admitted they had heard rumors months before the first police report was filed. The schools faced immense pressure. Administrators released statements, promising cooperation with law enforcement and support for affected families. But the community demanded more. How had Brittany been allowed so much access? Were background checks not enough? Should someone have noticed sooner? The questions piled up, and each answer seemed inadequate. Experts weighed in too. Psychologists explained the process of grooming, warning that predators often seek roles where they have access to young people and authority over them. They noted that substitute teachers sometimes face less scrutiny because their roles are temporary, but the trust they're given is still significant. Legal analysts pointed out the sheer number of charges, 47, and explained that prosecutors likely stack them to cover every alleged incident and to increase the chances of conviction on at least some counts. But defense attorneys watching from the sidelines reminded the public that charges are not proof. They emphasized that Brittany, like anyone else, was entitled to a presumption of innocence. They said the volume of charges might sound overwhelming, but in a courtroom, each count must stand on its own merit. For Brittany's legal team, the path forward was daunting. They filed motions to dismiss certain counts, argued about the admissibility of evidence, and pushed for stricter rules on what could be presented to a jury. Their strategy seemed clear: dismantle the prosecution's case piece by piece, show inconsistencies, and argue that reasonable doubt lingered in every corner. Meanwhile, the alleged victims and their families lived with a different kind of pressure. Coming forward in a small town meant facing scrutiny not just from strangers, but from neighbors, classmates, even extended relatives. Some parents feared backlash. Others feared that speaking up would define their children's lives forever. Prosecutors worked to shield identities where possible, but the social cost of disclosure remained heavy. Investigators kept building their case. They allegedly uncovered digital evidence, conversations saved in apps, images, and records of communication. Prosecutors said these weren't isolated messages, but patterns that supported the testimonies already given. The defense countered that technology can be unreliable, that teenagers sometimes create or fabricate digital exchanges, and that investigators may have drawn conclusions too quickly. At each hearing, the weight of the charges hung in the air. Reporters scribbled notes, local news outlets ran nightly updates, and the community felt torn between disbelief and outrage. Some held to the idea that Brittany was being framed or misunderstood, while others demanded accountability, convinced that where there was smoke, there was fire. The case also reignited conversations about how schools handle misconduct allegations. Advocates pointed out that across the country, cases of teachers accused of abuse often revealed systemic failures, missed warning signs, inadequate policies, or a reluctance to believe young people when they came forward. This case, they argued, should be a wake-up call not just for Indiana but nationwide. And as prosecutors reminded the court, the number of charges wasn't arbitrary. Each one represented an alleged moment, a specific act that someone claimed had happened. To the alleged victims, these weren't just case numbers. They were memories etched into their lives, experiences they now had to recount under oath. For the defense, the challenge was to show that memories can be flawed, that stories can change over time, that teenagers may influence one another. They emphasized the importance of cross-examination, of testing every detail until the truth could stand on its own. But for those sitting in the courtroom, listening to teenagers describe moments they wish they could forget, the atmosphere was heavy. Some jurors were seen shifting uncomfortably, others fighting back emotion. Even before a verdict, the case had already left scars on families, on the school system, and on the town itself. The story of Brittany and Nicholas Fortinberry was no longer a rumor or a headline. It was now a case that defined a community, a test of the justice system, and a reminder of the fragile trust placed in those tasked with guiding children. Whether the allegations would hold in court was a question for a jury, but the damage to the town's sense of security had already been done. And as the trial loomed closer, one thing became clear. Whatever the verdict, life in this quiet Indiana town would never feel the same again. The media couldn't look away. National outlets began to pick up the story, framing it as part of a disturbing trend. Educators accused of crossing unthinkable lines. To some reporters, Brittany Fortinberry's case was shocking because of the sheer number of charges. To others, it was Nicholas's alleged role that made it stand out. Husband and wife defendants made for headlines that demanded attention. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. Commentators debated the case on talk shows. Podcasts devoted entire episodes to analyzing the allegations, pulling apart every known detail, speculating about motives and outcomes. The town found itself at the center of an unwanted spotlight, with strangers hundreds of miles away now weighing in on its darkest scandal. Meanwhile, the legal process moved slowly, deliberately. Pre-trial hearings stretched on, motions filed back and forth. Defense attorneys challenged the wording of indictments, questioned whether certain alleged evidence should be admissible, and argued that the case had been tainted by media coverage. Prosecutors, in turn, reinforced their stance that the weight of testimony and alleged evidence would be undeniable in front of a jury. Behind closed doors, investigators were still working. They continued to interview potential witnesses, double-check timelines, and follow up on digital forensics. The goal was to leave no gaps for the defense to exploit. Forensic experts combed through phones, laptops, and apps, pulling deleted messages and tracing communication patterns. Prosecutors would later describe these alleged records as painting a picture of sustained and intentional contact with minors. The defense countered that technology can tell many stories, not all of them accurate. They raised questions about chain of custody, about whether investigators handled devices properly, about whether some of the data could have been fabricated or altered. They stressed that without airtight proof, what prosecutors called patterns might only be coincidences. As more details trickled into the public sphere, reactions grew even more polarized. Some community members defended Brittany, saying she was being targeted unfairly, that the prosecution was blowing everything out of proportion. Others demanded justice, calling for maximum sentences if the allegations were proven. The tension in the town became almost unbearable. Neighbors divided, conversations hushed, friendships strained. The alleged victims remained at the center of it all. Prosecutors worked hard to prepare them for what was coming. Experts in trauma explained that testifying would not be easy, that reliving alleged abuse in front of strangers, lawyers, and the accused could re-traumatize them. Advocates promised support, counseling, and protection from harassment. Still, the fear of facing a courtroom weighed heavily. For some of the teenagers, the decision to testify felt like reclaiming power. For others, it was a terrifying prospect. And for the families, every choice came with pain. To remain silent risked letting go of justice. To speak out meant years of legal battles, media attention, and public scrutiny. As the charges piled up, the scope of the case widened. Brittany wasn't just accused of one form of misconduct. The counts included alleged child molestation, solicitation, and providing harmful materials. Each charge carried its own weight, its own potential sentence, and its own story. Prosecutors framed it as a pattern of calculated grooming, one that allegedly spanned months and multiple individuals. The introduction of Nicholas into the narrative made it even more complex. Prosecutors suggested he wasn't simply an uninvolved husband, that he allegedly played a role in protecting Brittany and keeping victims silent. Threats, intimidation, warnings. If those allegations were proven, Nicholas could face years in prison himself. His defense team painted a very different picture. arguing he was being unfairly vilified for something he didn't do, that hearsay had turned him into a villain without real evidence. At one hearing, the courtroom was nearly silent as prosecutors read through the list of charges one by one. Each count carried the weight of an alleged act. Each number was followed by a description that made parents in the gallery shift uncomfortably in their seats. By the time the list was finished, the enormity of the case hung heavy over everyone in the room. Brittany sat with her attorneys, expression controlled, hands folded. Nicholas stared straight ahead. Neither spoke. Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere was different. Protesters held signs demanding justice for the alleged victims. Others insisted Brittany was innocent until proven guilty, warning against rushing to judgment. Reporters tried to capture both sides, but the images that stuck were of young faces standing with advocates, holding on to courage in the midst of chaos. Legal experts following the case began to speculate about possible outcomes. Some believed prosecutors would push for a plea deal, not only to spare alleged victims from testifying, but to ensure some measure of accountability without risking acquittal. Others argued that with so many charges, a trial was inevitable. The defense, meanwhile, seemed to signal readiness to fight every inch of the way. The complexity of the case lay not only in the number of charges, but in the overlapping allegations. Each alleged victim had a different timeline, a different story, a different set of evidence. Prosecutors would need to weave those accounts into a coherent narrative, showing jurors how they all fit together. The defense would try to pull them apart, highlighting contradictions, attacking credibility, and reminding jurors of the presumption of innocence. In the town, parents became more protective than ever. Children were rarely left alone. School board meetings grew heated, with demands for stronger safeguards, stricter vetting of teachers, and more transparency when complaints arise. Educators felt the suspicion, even those who had nothing to do with the case. Trust in the system had been fractured. Brittany's own background came under scrutiny. People combed through her history, trying to understand who she was, how she ended up here, and whether there had been red flags along the way. To some, she seemed like an ordinary woman who blended in with the community. To prosecutors, she was someone who allegedly used that very ordinariness as a shield. For Nicholas, the questions were just as intense. What did he know, and when? Was he complicit, as prosecutors claimed? Or was he an unsuspecting husband caught in a nightmare? The accusations against him made every detail of their marriage a matter of public curiosity. Even casual photographs posted online in years past were dissected for clues. The case wasn't just about individuals anymore. It was about systems, institutions, and the fragile boundary between trust and betrayal. Every update in court became headline news. Every motion filed sparked debate. Every revelation sent shockwaves through a community still struggling to make sense of what it all meant. And beneath all of it, the alleged victims and their families waited for justice, for resolution, for an end to the spotlight that had consumed their lives. The trial wasn't yet underway, but already, the case had left an indelible mark. The quiet Indiana town that once seemed so safe and predictable was now known nationwide for something darker. And as the legal battle moved closer to trial, one truth became clear. Whatever the verdict, the shadow of the allegations would linger long after the final gavel fell. The weight of the charges grew heavier with each passing week. 47 criminal counts, a staggering number that few in the community could fully wrap their minds around. Parents repeated the number like it was some sort of curse, a reminder that this wasn't a single lapse in judgment, as the defense suggested, but, according to prosecutors, a calculated series of acts that left behind a trail of alleged victims. Every news update repeated the tally. 47 counts. The repetition gave the case a gravity that was impossible to ignore. Prosecutors didn't present the charges as accidents or misunderstandings. They said they were deliberate, targeted, and sustained. They argued that Brittany allegedly manipulated her role as a teacher to cross boundaries that should never have been crossed. For the alleged victims, each charge was more than a number. It was a validation that their stories were being heard, that their pain mattered. But it was also a heavy burden, because with each count came the expectation that they might have to testify, that they might have to relive the worst moments of their young lives in front of strangers, defense attorneys, and even the accused herself. The community found itself stuck between two conflicting instincts: the desire to protect children at all costs, and the reluctance to believe that someone they knew, someone they trusted, could be capable of what was alleged. It was easier to believe that rumors had spiraled out of control, that teenagers had exaggerated, that prosecutors were being overzealous. But the number 47 made it harder and harder to dismiss. In the courtroom, motions flew back and forth. The defense fought to exclude certain alleged digital evidence, claiming it was unreliable or taken out of context. They argued that not every message implied misconduct, that ordinary conversations were being painted as sinister because of the charges hanging over Brittany's head. Prosecutors countered with expert witnesses, specialists in digital forensics, who explained how deleted data could be recovered, how communication patterns revealed intent, and how the alleged exchanges fit into a broader picture of grooming behavior. It wasn't just the alleged texts. Prosecutors claimed there were accounts of gifts being offered, attention that went far beyond what a teacher should give, and in some cases, threats to keep quiet. These details, they argued, were consistent with known methods of grooming, a process that experts testified was deliberate, manipulative, and devastatingly effective. The defense pressed back with equal force. They painted Brittany as misunderstood, a woman who may have been overly familiar with students, but who never crossed the line into criminal behavior. They suggested that teenagers, influenced by one another and by outside voices, had misinterpreted her actions. They argued that prosecutors were weaving a narrative out of gossip and stretching the facts to fit it. For Nicholas, the courtroom battles carried their own weight. Prosecutors alleged that he played an active role in silencing at least one victim, telling him to stay away from Brittany until he was older. To them, this showed knowledge and complicity. To the defense, it was nothing more than unverified hearsay. His lawyers argued that he was being dragged into a nightmare simply because of who he was married to. Yet the charges against Nicholas remained. He was no longer just the husband of the accused. He was a defendant in his own right, facing allegations that could alter the rest of his life. As the trial date inched closer, the atmosphere in town grew tense. Parents debated whether to allow their kids to testify if subpoenaed. Teachers whispered about how this case would change the way schools operated forever. Even church sermons touched on the themes of betrayal, trust, and accountability. It was as though the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for a verdict that hadn't even been decided yet. The alleged victims, meanwhile, carried on with their lives as best they could. Some tried to blend into the background, hoping not to be recognized. Others leaned on advocacy groups and found strength in solidarity. But all of them knew that the road ahead was long, and that even if justice was served, the scars would remain. The legal stakes were enormous. If convicted on the most serious charges, Brittany could face decades, potentially the rest of her life, behind bars. Prosecutors didn't mince words about this. They said the law existed to protect the vulnerable, and if the allegations were proven, she should face the full weight of it. The defense saw it differently. They claimed the state was overreaching, stacking charges to force a plea, and vilifying Brittany beyond reason. They argued that no one should be condemned by accusation alone, that due process was more important than outrage, and that the truth would emerge in court. For the families of the alleged victims, the legal back and forth felt secondary to the personal toll. They described sleepless nights, children withdrawing from friends, fear of retaliation, and the crushing weight of reliving their experiences. Some parents expressed guilt, wondering how they could have missed the signs. Others channeled their anger into advocacy, demanding stronger protections and stricter accountability in schools. The courtroom became not just a place for legal argument, but a stage where two starkly different narratives played out. To the prosecution, this was a case about a teacher who allegedly exploited her authority and her husband who allegedly helped her cover it up. To the defense, it was about assumptions, exaggerations, and a rush to judgment that threatened to destroy two lives without proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Experts who analyzed the case for news outlets reminded the public that trials are not decided by headlines or emotions. They're decided by evidence. And in this case, evidence would mean testimony, digital records, and the ability of each side to convince a jury. Still, even before a jury was seated, the damage was done. The trust parents once placed in schools had been broken. The town's name was tied to headlines about scandal and betrayal. And the alleged victims were already carrying scars that a verdict could never fully erase. As the trial drew near, speculation grew. Would Brittany take a plea to avoid putting teenagers on the stand? Would Nicholas's charges be tried separately? Would a jury be able to set aside the tidal wave of media coverage and weigh only the evidence presented? The answers were uncertain. But one thing was clear. When the trial began, the community would be forced to confront its darkest fears head-on. And no matter the outcome, life in this Indiana town would never return to what it once was. This case is still unfolding, and the courtroom battles ahead promise even more twists. What do you think about the allegations? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who follows true crime as closely as you do. And if you want more deep dive documentaries like this, hit subscribe, because the next case might be even more unbelievable than this one. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next documentary.